Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to this brand new video. My name is Laura from PleiadianHealer.com, and today I want to cover cacao and cacao ceremonies, which cacao is pretty widespread at this point, especially in the New Age movement. I just want to talk about certain things that I've personally witnessed and observed over these past 6+ years that I have been dealing with cacao and also cacao ceremonies, and how they can actually be quite detrimental, and the dark truth behind cacao, where it really comes from, how it's made. So I'm also going to share a really interesting article, which I think you might find pretty informative. Let's just get into the topic. I'm going to share the screen for this. So cacao, what is cacao really? First and foremost, you do have the difference between cacao, which is the raw, unprocessed version of cocoa. So you have cacao and then you have cocoa. And I think there's a lot of confusion when people talk about cocoa, cacao, this and that. So both are kind of the same. I mean, they all, at the end of the day, they do come from the same plant and all of that. It's just the way they're being processed that makes it a little bit different. Supposedly it's best to stick to the raw version, which is cacao. Now you will find cocoa in chocolate products. I mean, obviously also cacao, but cocoa would be that people who have hot chocolates, or who eat chocolate bars, that would be cocoa. Whereas cacao is really this raw, unprocessed version that you do find in a lot of these New Age ceremonies that are blowing up lately, and in other parts as well. So cacao has been around for a little while already, although it has gained popularity for the past, I don't know, 5+ years. I'm not really sure. The first time I personally came across it was certainly in 2017. And that was here in Brooklyn, where I was part of a few of these ceremonies. And I just want to say right off the bat, I felt I got almost nothing out of these ceremonies. So the placebo effect runs very strong with these type of ceremonies. Usually they do run anywhere from like 15, $20 to higher, 40, $50, depending on who facilitates the ceremony. So at this point, in addition for it just being like a fad, a fashion statement, it almost seems like it's also just another ripoff or something that people want to make money off who don't really know much about cacao in and of itself. It is one of the most hyped ceremonial tools of the New Age these days, for sure. And back in 2017, also 2018, so I was sitting in this circle. Back then it was still relatively small. I think there were 10 people max in it. And then the person who was facilitating the circle, who now runs a business solely off cacao and all that. So that is kind of just blown up. I think the circles are up to 100 people at this point. I don't attend them at all anymore. I'm out of that movement, out of that cult. But back then, I already felt back in the days I got nothing out of it other than sitting in a cult-like circle and basically listening to people sharing something, because the circles were kind of built up in the sense of, we're opening our heart to the cacao because cacao is supposedly a heart-based tool or something that's supposed to open up your heart chakra, all of that. I don't doubt it, but it's just the way it went about, where it was literally like people were sharing their most intimate moments in this circle, which it almost felt like a cult. And I was also listening to the ego of this person who was facilitating the circle, who was giving the cacao. And she herself had said that she actually would have needed way more training with cacao and with this entire background of it. And she actually shouldn't even be facilitating these type of circles. But since it is becoming more and more prominent, since it is blowing up more and more, she just decided she's going to go ahead and build her business on that. Just to kind of give you an idea of who these people are. I don't want to say her name, I don't want to like convey it in that sense. But it's a person who, she does have Latin American background, but she's not from Ecuador. She's not from Guatemala. She's not from any of these places. She has a lot of entities in her fields too. I do recognize that nowadays, that I'm able to read that better than I was back then. And I really feel a lot of these ceremonies call just that in. They call in all these entities. It's just another way for these astral entities to feast off of the circle, where people are opening themselves up, they're opening up their energy, they're opening up their containers, and to really dive in. And it does have this cult-like fashion. I do hate to say that. So, you know, her stuff blew up, of course, because New Agers love that. You know, they love to do things that in hindsight make zero sense. As long as it makes them feel better, it gives them a form of high. A lot of these people who attended those circles are also the ones who would be taking psychedelics, who would be going to raves, who would be going to Burning Man. I had a video out on that. So it was here in Bushwick, Brooklyn, for people who are local, which is a burner scene. So it didn't really mix well. But like back then I was already wondering, well, you're kind of mixing this real spiritual component together into the cacao, but you're kind of being pseudo spiritual about it, because these people are slurping down their cacao. And let's just say the ceremony was at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. And then in the same breath, literally an hour later, they would be drinking their alcohol, putting in their drugs or substances that they're on, and basically go onto their rave with a devil-like sign, right? And basically just get really turned up with that. And I'm like, none of this is real spirituality. Like, this is just pseudo spirituality that you're trying to make a buck off. And it already rubbed me the wrong way back then. I do have to say that. And it still does when I see those type of things, especially here in New York, because it's such a pretentiousness that needs to be called out, right? And so I could go on and name all these people, name all these institutions that sponsor these people. Maybe that's for a different video. I just really want to focus on the cacao itself. So I want to quote an article. Before I do that, I do want to say I know at least one person, and she's not from here. She's actually in a completely different country, because cacao can be found everywhere at this point. It can be found in England, it can be found in Australia, it can be found every single where it doesn't really belong, because cacao belongs into one area, and that is that specific South America and Latin America area it actually thrives in, which is typically Ecuador, which is typically Guatemala, maybe a few countries around there too, but that's where it's native to. And so this entire concept that I've already talked about in other videos, and which I will talk about in future videos, similar to ayahuasca, similar to other substances too, you need to respect the plant that you're consuming. And if you're just using it and abusing it for all this pseudo spiritual stuff that makes no sense, yeah, of course it's going to damage your body somehow. So the person I know who was in a different country, she did cacao circles, or she did her own cacao ceremony every single day. And she started developing both liver and kidney issues. And it turns out that, first of all, the cacao that you're buying nowadays, no matter how certified it is and whether or not it comes from these highly spiritual areas like Guatemala and Ecuador, it's not the pure cacao that you're going to find when you actually go there, travel there, and get it right from the field or whatever. They're mixing something into it, very obvious. And so this person started developing all these issues with it, where I started reading on it, and what I got. So I'm just going to share the vision that I got when I read on it was, so first of all, I asked, is cacao bad for your liver, or more so the chemicals in it? Because I already felt when I heard that story, there's something in it. They're mixing something in it that's not good for your bodies. They're kind of preservatives or something. What I got was the pure cacao plant. So when you actually see it, it's this, it kind of looks like this huge bean or whatever. I was going to share this picture of a ceremony. So the pure cacao plant in and of itself, no, actually, that's not necessarily bad for you. The vision I got was a worker, just a random worker who looked Ecuadorian or Guatemalan. He was in a field chopping things to pieces. And there were like these small chunks being packaged up. So whatever they're giving you is not, or very seldom, the pure cacao, but it's also mixed with other things that can harm the liver. And I kept seeing this body organ highlighted. I kept seeing the liver highlighted specifically. So it could very well be that it also gets into your kidneys. But I kept seeing this liver organ highlighted whenever I was reading on it, Whether or not that's chemicals or even a different potion, we don't know. It's questionable. But it's similar to this entire ayahuasca thing, where whatever they're giving you in these ceremonies, especially in Costa Rica, especially in Peru, and all of these, what's that huge ayahuasca ceremony in Costa Rica? Rhythmia, right? Whatever they're giving you in these retreats, they're not giving you the pure plant that you actually were asking for, what you're needing. They're mixing it with a whole bunch of other stuff, which I'll cover in a different video too. So it's similar with this entire cacao. Even though you think you're getting the pure whatever, the pure bean or the pure cacao, you're actually not anymore, because at this point, cacao is a business. And it's been that way probably for the past 5 or 6 years or even longer, which is also why this person who was giving these ceremonies here in New York was able to blow up in such a way, because it's a fad. You know, it's literally, it's in fashion. People want it. People are addicted to it at this point too. You can get addicted to chocolate 100%. It's more the sugar that makes you addicted, but there are certain addictive tendencies that cacao also has. Just want to throw that out there. Now, I know some New Agers are going to hate this video because it's going to throw their entire world around, especially the ones that actually take it every single day. If you need to take something every single day, whether or not it's cacao, whether or not it's coffee, whether or not it's a cigarette, you're addicted to it. There's no other, I mean, I'm not talking about eating your breakfast every single day. If you can't live without your cacao, there's a form of addiction that you need to, you know, kind of combat, or ask yourself, how can I make this right? How can I not be so addictive to it? And so this entire idea of purchasing cacao from these people who have made it their business, who aren't even honoring it anymore, they're only honoring it in a pseudo spiritual way. They're not communicating with the plants. They're not giving their thanks to the plant or to the food that they're consuming. All of this is just pure hypocrisy. And I've known it because I've been a part of these ceremonies, and I've seen it. I've seen the infiltration in this entire industry from the ground up. And so they're not honoring it. They're making it their business. They're earning a lot of money with their business too. I mean, it's good for them, of course, but they're doing it in such a way that's completely infiltrating the entire idea behind a spirituality of cacao, which it used to be at one point, sure. And they're also putting it in all these areas in the world where it doesn't belong. And I'm not saying take it away from them again, no, but we need to approach this in a different manner. If you want to stick with cacao, which I personally am not drawn to cacao, you know, I'm drawn to other things, but cacao for me, I've never felt drawn to, because I always felt it's been made into this business. There's an exploitation happening similar to the coffee beans. I also don't drink coffee, by the way. Whenever I drink coffee, I put a red mark in my calendar, because that's a day that really doesn't happen too frequently. And so you have to really ask yourself, what's behind it? Why are things blowing up? So I personally knew this one woman, this one person who had to give up her daily cacao ritual. I mean, just imagine drinking this daily, and it's infiltrated with pesticides, with chemicals, with other stuff that doesn't belong in it. It was impacting her liver somehow. It was poisoning her body over time. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at this point the cacao you buy from these ego gurus is completely festered with chemicals and pesticides themselves, similar to what you get when you buy the coffee, right? Because the demand is so high, they need to deliver. And these type of medicines, because cacao is considered a medicine, first and foremost, you're not supposed to take a medicine every single day. You're supposed to take it when you feel the urge to take it, when you feel called to take it, or when your body needs it and desires it. These type of medicines are really not meant for daily use. Similar to how psychedelics are misused, how ayahuasca is really abused, right? Medicinal plants are not meant to be observed and eaten every single day, but they're meant to be used in a sacred environment and for a purpose. The entire idea that the New Age now pushes with substituting your morning coffee with cacao is completely absurd. Once again, not to mention all the other stuff that might be in it that could really poison your body, which coffee now contains pesticides and chemicals too, as we all know. So from what I've gotten, cacao has been severely abused. And also with the entire export, what's going on, it's an exploitation of the sacredness to it. Instead, it should actually remain where it belongs, on the lands with the knowledge of its people as well. So there are certain side effects to cacao, which I also want to share real quick, more so with cocoa, but certainly cacao as well. And these could be, you know, diabetes, high blood pressure, Parkinson's disease in some rare instances, intestinal disease, diarrhea, asthma, bronchitis, lung congestion, liver issues, bladder, kidney ailments, other type of conditions. It can also make your heart really race. So it can increase nervousness, increased urination, sleeplessness, and a fast heartbeat. So heart palpitations. It can contain caffeine and related chemicals. So it really depends on what you don't really know what you're getting, honestly, at this point. So, yeah, there are some, I mean, there's been research done on this. You can look it up yourself. I want to share this article that I found. It's from Dismantle Mag. I'll link it in the description below. The Power of Cacao, the latest trend in New Age consumer spirituality. And I just love their name, Dismantle Mag. In 2019, I found myself sitting on a shady porch overlooking Guatemala's spectacular Lake Atitlan. So I've been to Lake Atitlan. I actually stayed in San Marcos. That was in June 2018. The most pretentious community I've ever encountered. And I actually didn't enjoy it that much. I enjoyed it more in Flores, which is up north in Guatemala, where all of the pyramids and everything is. Lake Atitlan, for me, especially San Marcos, was one of the most pretentious communities ever. This is before I even started exposing the new cage for what it is. I already felt back then, there's something wrong here. There's something off. You know, it's like all these yoga mommies coming from California who really aren't that spiritual. They just want their fix. And then they pay like $4,000 to $5,000 per retreat. And mind you, Guatemala back then was one of the cheapest countries ever. You know, you don't need to spend $5,000 on a yoga retreat in Guatemala. You can get it for a fraction of the price. I would say like a few $100s, but it's a money-making business, as we know. And yoga and the New Age are related, very much so. As I was sipping on a bitter cacao from a plastic cup, why would you serve it in a plastic cup, first and foremost? You know, this is really such a sacred plant that can open your heart and make your body feel better. You should have it from a proper cup, like a wooden cup or some other type of cup, but you know, you should actually have it from a proper container. Just this entire plastic cup thing, and then the plastic cup waste in all the third world countries, like you could write an entire book just on that too. I jotted down the words of Guatemala's famous chocolate shaman, Keith Wilson. Please note, Keith Wilson seems like a very Western name. A lot of these people don't actually come from Guatemala. They're just really there to make a big buck out of the sacred fruits that they find. He's a native from Connecticut, and he moved to Guatemala over 15 years ago, started holding cacao ceremonies. There's a legendary expat community now and backpacker community in Guatemala, as we all know. I mean, I know because I've been there. So this author is just basically talking how she was participating in this famed ritual with 30 people present. We were sitting in a perfectly erect lotus posture. The lotus posture, for people who didn't know, it can actually really ruin your knees. So if you're doing this daily, you should be very careful with your knees, okay? Smiling earnestly and hanging on to every word that came from the bearded shaman's mouth. But unlike many of these followers, I wasn't there to discover a new path to self-enlightenment. I was there as an observer, curious about this new phenomena and what it all meant for larger questions of power in a global capitalist hierarchy. This is the best sentence ever, because that's basically all this New Age business and cacao business is about. It's a capitalist hierarchy. And then she writes, my journey to the shaman. Despite having lived in Guatemala for almost 6 years, the first time I ever heard of a cacao ceremony was exactly a year before, while on a trip home to Ireland for a family wedding. And this is exactly the pretentiousness of everything. This person's living in Guatemala, in the sacred land where the cacao comes from, and the locals aren't doing these ceremonies. Why are Westerners doing them in Ireland or other places like here in the US, right? Taking a break from our whistle-stop tour of the Irish countryside, my partner and I took refuge from the gale force winds of Connemara in my favorite Galway pub. It was jammed full, and we got chatting with some of the locals. I think it's called Galway, not Galway. Sorry, guys. I know I've actually been here. I've been to Connemara and I've been to Galway too. Upon discovering that my partner was Guatemalan, a woman wedged into the bar next to us extended an invitation to a Guatemalan cacao ceremony that very evening. And they end up going there. Although we were a bit surprised, it had made its way across the ocean to Ireland, we actually politely declined this opportunity until a month later when we were back in Guatemala. And then they kind of got into this entire, she's saying, my need to interrogate this instance of New Age consumer spiritualities was largely fueled by my own ties to Guatemala. I decided to go to the source, a cacao ceremony on Wilson's porch. Upon moving back to Ireland in 2019, I also tracked down one of his prodigies, Paula Gibson. She's the owner of a Dublin-based business. All these people, you know, I'm not going to name their businesses because they're all infiltrated. Wilson has been in Guatemala, which I like to call Guatemala, Guatemala, by the way, because that's really what it's supposed to be. He had been there since 2003. He harvests, according to his website, he was visited by the cacao spirit shortly after arriving in the country, who guided him to use cacao as a plant medicine to facilitate his healing work with Westerners. He harvests, processes, and sells his own brand, Keith's Cacao, which is described as ceremonial grade cacao. So basically, he was visited by a random entity, and he made it into $1 million business, is what she's saying. Okay, so just keep that in. You know, like a random entity visits him, he makes this huge business out of it. Like, this is exactly the pretentiousness I'm talking about. If you were really spiritual guided, like the entire income, making profit off of this stuff would not be your main prerogative. Your main prerogative would be to heal others, which is obviously not, because at this point the cacao ceremonies cost $40+, even more depending on where you go. So she's kind of talking about all these ceremonies in it and how cultural appropriation plays a role. Cacao shamanism is too similar to other examples of appropriation to be trusted. Another author reflects, I didn't know it would be led by a white woman, or else I would have opted out of the experience. I find it extremely problematic when white folks appropriate these ceremonies and then profit off of them without giving back to the community who owns the rights to these ancestral activities. Now, the person here in New York, she actually does work with supposedly indigenous people. If you read the energy, and this is what I'm saying, indigenous doesn't necessarily mean they're good. You know, I've had curses put on me by indigenous people. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. The reason these curses and spells, which I also cover in my psychic protection course, if you're interested, the reason they're so strong is because they're put on by these native people. And these native people are very much in tune with the land they're on. So they're having like a power, an extreme power to them, similar to how Maori people in New Zealand and Aborigines in Australia have an extreme power when they're on their land, because they've been just so native with that land for a long time, like hundreds and hundreds of years, as opposed to the Westerners who kind of came over like just a few hundred years ago or even less than that. But basically, the entire cultural appropriation, I myself don't really have an issue with white people facilitating these ceremonies. Now, what I've noticed with this person here in New York, who does invite all these indigenous supposed shamans or whatever in, their energy is horrendous. And I'm not saying that to be facetious or to be mean or to be, you know, looking down upon natives or whatever, but this is exactly the energy I would imagine with a native shaman somewhere in Peru trying to trick you into an ayahuasca ceremony to kind of hijack you somehow spiritually. The energy of these natives is not great. is actually sometimes so horrendous that I have to put a hand on the picture whenever she posts a picture, because I'm like, I don't want that psychic attack coming from this person. This person's up to no good, native or not, and they shouldn't even be facilitating a ceremony, because all they're doing is calling in more psychic attacks on people. And people who read energy, you can see a picture of a person, you can see their energy, you know, just like people tell me my energy's clear, because I work hard on keeping my energy clear of everything, and I don't call in any random stuff. I cleanse myself regularly. I clear my energy. You need to do that. When you do this type of work, you need to do that daily. It's a daily shower, energetic shower you need to be taken. And these people are not doing the work. They're really just there to make a big buck out of whatever that's not even native to them anymore. And so this author basically goes on. She even says that, you know, I'm just quoting here, I'm not reading this entire article because it's quite long, but she even says that it's not normal in Guatemala to attend these type of ceremonies. So the actual country, or even in Ecuador, the actual country where the cacao is supposedly from, which it is from there, natives don't sit in ceremony like that. You know, like they don't demand 10 pesos, whatever, from their locals to sit in ceremony. No, absolutely not. So it's basically just sitting around with new age hippies drinking cacao. And it's a global cacao industry. At this point, it's 40 euro in Dublin, which I think this was written a few years ago. It could be even more. I think 60 bucks is the last time I looked into these ceremonies that they wanted, but it obviously depends on who's facilitating it. So she's going off saying she always fell asleep during these ceremonies, which I personally find interesting, because when you fall asleep during these type of ceremonies, it means they're calling something in. And when you fall asleep, you're going to be vulnerable to entities attaching to you. And she also says she went home on the bus with a belly ache. So if you're drinking something that's supposedly good for you, why are you having a belly ache, right? Was it my intolerance for cacao or karma for infiltrating a sacred space with my profane motives? Either way, my deep dive into the world of cacao ceremonies confirmed my worst suspicions that this phenomenon is, in fact, nothing more than the latest new age trend of spiritual hustling. And it's similar to those hallucinogens such as ayahuasca, just, you know, taking it a step further depending on where you go. So yeah, I think that kind of summarizes everything you need to know about cacao. I'm not saying this to be mean in regards to cacao. I do think it can help some people. But if you are doing cacao, you should question, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it daily? I mean, you should be doing it for very sacred circumstances, like maybe the equinox or a solstice or whatever. Not more than a handful of times throughout the year, if even. You know, like this is not something you should be even doing on a monthly basis. Like this is a sacred plant. It has a purpose. You need to tap into that purpose. You can intuitively find out yourself, what is the purpose this cacao can give me? Is it really something that I need to be doing every 2 weeks and, you know, a ceremony with others? No, you can do it yourself, but you don't have to do it daily. And yeah, let us know, you know, if you've experienced something similar, if you've had attacks during these type of ceremonies. I wouldn't be surprised if you do. Let's put it that way. My own experience from a few years ago is basically pretentiousness, hypocrisy, and literally spiritual. Yeah, I guess it is a form of cultural appropriation in that sense. But it's people facilitating these circles that are kind of like beginners or don't know much about it. But even the ones who have been in it for a little while, I wasn't super convinced by their ceremonies. I'm not convinced by a lot of ceremonies these days because I see the entire facade behind it. I see what it's really about. It's seldom about real spirituality. Mostly it's just about, you know, effing with people, effing with their energy, trying to really mess their energy up. Of course, cacao is not as severe as an ayahuasca ceremony where you're being assaulted or kind of spiritually hijacked, which I talk about in my ayahuasca video a lot. I want to talk about that again, though, because people still don't seem to understand what's really happening when you open your vessel up to such an extent and you have a shaman taking advantage of that, like it happens in some of these retreats. But basically, cacao is not as severe because it's not a like a psychedelic or a hallucinatory drug or substance. That's the only good part about it. But cacao can actually do get to your body as it appears, and obviously it can somehow get to you spiritually and mentally and emotionally too. But other than that, it seems like there's really not much purpose for you to do it if you really don't understand what this plant is about, what the medicine is about. And you shouldn't be taking medicine every single day, no matter what. So you need to ask yourself why you're drawn to cacao, what the reason is behind it. And if so, if the reason is different than from what the New Age is telling you. All right, guys, I hope this helps. And have a good one. Enjoy your sip of tea or whatever you're drinking, sip of water. Talk to you very soon. Until the next video. Bye.